with us is our old buddy Jeff Sharlet, a journalist, author of multiple books. He's been on this program many times, including his latest, Undertow, Scenes from a Slow Civil War, or The Undertow. He also wrote The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power, which is also a Netflix special, I believe, and executive produced the Netflix miniseries based on it. In his spare time, he's a professor of English and the director of creative writing at Dartmouth College. And I have to add, one of the best writers in America. Jeff went out and spent time in America for this book. It is story after story after story of people's lives, and by way of illustrating the points. It's so readable. Jeff, welcome back to the program. So glad to have you with us.
Hi, Tom. Great to be with you again.
The cover of the book has a picture of a knife, and this isn't, a hunting knife or a let's whittle some wood knife. This is the kind of knife that you use in combat. This is the kind of knife that you use if you're going to kill something or someone. Tell us the story of this knife.
The knife belongs to a woman named Ashley Babbitt, who listeners may know was the 35-year-old Air Force veteran, a white woman from Southern California who was summoned by Trump. She wanted to be the storm. She wanted to be his boots on the ground, so she went to Washington on January 6th. She invaded the Capitol. She led the charge. She climbed up in a broken window where a Capitol police officer, fearing that she was going to attack the members of Congress on the other side, shot her, and she died. And she's since become a martyr of the movement in a lot of complicated ways. But key to that myth is the idea that she was unarmed. She was not unarmed. That's Ashley Babbitt's knife. And in fact, if you look closely at that's the evidence photograph. That photograph was taken on January 6, 2021. If you look closely at the photograph, you see the date. And it's not a huge knife. It is a kind of knife. In fact, it's interesting because even now, Tucker Carlson and so many others insist she was unarmed. She wasn't unarmed. You present folks with the evidence of the knife, and they say, well, that's, you could use that maybe, a handyman's knife or something like that. Try carrying that knife onto an airplane. Try carrying that knife through a metal detector at a courthouse. Try carrying that knife into the Capitol and entering any other way than by through a smashed open door, which is what she did. It's a real weapon, and I think that's important. For the fact of it, but also that the myth that they're so intent on this idea of unarmed Ashley Babbitt. No, she was there to do damage.
Tell me about the Ashley Babbitt challenge coins. And what does this tell us about how movements? I mean, when I lived in Germany, I learned about Horst Wessel. He was the martyr of the Nazis. I mean, it looks to me like. And from what I read in your book, that basically a cult is being formed around her that's not unlike, Horst Wessel. And to this day, the Horst Wessel song is illegal to sing in Germany.
Yeah, the Ashley Babbitt challenge coin distributed by Proud Boys at Ashley Babbitt rallies. It's a sort of like a little medallion, and it features the same image that you can find on the Ashley Babbitt flags or Ashley Babbitt T-shirts, hats, probably beer cozies, anything you want. And it's a sort of idealized picture of this blonde white woman with one drop of blood at her neck. And behind her is the Capitol on fire, in flames. And then beneath it says in sort of Gothic lettering, vengeance. And it's just one of the many images that have arisen since then as part of this development of this martyr cult. You mentioned Horst Wessel, the Nazi martyr. I thought of him that day. We watched Ashley Babbitt die almost in real time, that video that came out. And there was actually more videos. And as soon as I saw it, I saw the hands of the officer who killed her. We could only see his hands. And he's a black man. And I knew what they were going to do with it because I'm an American. We live with this mythology, this awful history. It was going to be the lynching story. The lynching story in America, the cause that so many black men were brutally killed for, was this idea that they were somehow threatening innocent white womanhood. And for that story to be true, of course, they have to make the white womanhood very innocent. So not only do they insist that she was unarmed, but almost immediately that very day in videos I found, just tiny little videos by going through the archives, people talking about it out on the steps. And I talked to a lot of January 6 folks too. She was 35, but they would age her backwards. No, she's probably in 20s. No, just barely 20. She was 16, very young, right? And they make her smaller. She was a small woman, but no, she can't be 120 pounds. She must be 115. No, she must be 110. They're aging her into the innocence of white girlhood. It's an old story, and it's central to their, because we have to understand, even with that vengeance coin, with that nasty knife, fascism isn't actually a death cult. It perpetuates death, but it believes itself to be an innocence cult. It wants to be innocent of history, innocence of race, wants to be colorblind, innocence of accountability. The ideal fascist flag in some ways is a fetus and a gun, and it's a small miracle. No one has made that yet.
Yeah, and let's make no mistake, this is fascism. I remember when I was 11, 12 years old, this was like 1963, my dad took me to a John Birch Society meeting, and I had read, he had given me John Stormer's book, None Dare Call It Treason, about all the communists in the State Department. And these guys were talking about, and now this was at the time that John Birch Society was being funded heavily by Fred Koch, and they had billboards all over the United States that said impeach Earl Warren. And, they were talking about the communist threat and all this, and it was kind of fringe talk, but there was discussion, and there were books and pamphlets that they were selling about the coming revolution, about overthrowing our form of government, installing basically a right-wing government. I didn't take it all that seriously. My father didn't take it seriously. In fact, he told me when he took me there that he wanted me to see the crazies. And my dad was a Republican, but he was an Eisenhower Republican. But he thought I should know about the crazies. And now they're here. I mean, this has gone. That was what, 60 years ago. We are now fully in the midst of this. This was the thing that shocked me the most reading your book, was how well-armed these people are, how well-organized these people are, how many of them there are all over the country, and how committed they are to killing other Americans. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and I said, just to go back to a second, you said this is fascism, make no mistake. If we'd been talking 10 years ago, Tom, I would not. In fact, in my 2008 book, The Family, I said, I called it the F word, fascism. And I said, no, there's more than one kind of bad under the sun. And that's not what the right is in America, partly because of Christian fundamentalism. They won't switch out the Father, God, for a Führer, a cult of personality. And even though it's always a violent movement, they like to proclaim themselves of peace. That's changed. Trump, we are in the Trumpocene now. Trump opened that door. So we have the reverence for violence and the pleasure in violence and the cult of personality. And that has changed the landscape. I've been reporting on the right-wing movements for 20 years. In the 2 years I've been driving back and forth across the country for this book since January 6, 2021, I've encountered more guns than in all the years beforehand. And something has changed. It used to be that even as a lefty journalist, I could go to any kind of right-wing space, and oftentimes they'd say, oh, it's no accident you came here, thinking I'm going to be converted. Or they'd say, yeah, we know what you're about, but we'll talk to you because we're sure our ideas will somehow come through. Now, well, in Omaha, Nebraska, Church of Glad Tidings, or I'm sorry, that was in Yuba City, another militia church. Churches now have militias. Churches are arming up. This is a church, they had a sermon, Psalm 23. Some people may know it. It's one of the really sweet ones, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
Yeah, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death.
Probably, yeah. And thy rod and thy staff, they believe, and the pastor pointing to the gunmen around the church, the rod is a gun. And the calling of God now is war. And they believe civil war is coming. This, by the way, is not a fringe church. This is a suburban, very diverse, sort of mini mega church. The pastor is regularly on TV. And those Birchers, in some ways, the crazies have moved to the center, and they brought their guns with them. And I think about when we look at someone like the QAnon shaman, there's a so-called crazy, right? But on the other hand, then there's Ashley Babbitt, or there's Marjorie Taylor Greene. We laughed at her when she was elected a couple of years ago. Now she's, one of the most powerful people in the Republican Party, one of the most powerful people in one of the most powerful countries in the world. There's the zip tie guy. Remember him on January 6th leaping over chairs with his zip tie handcuffs? He seemed pretty ridiculous. Or then there's Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, who open carries into Congress, or Josh Hawley, who raises his fist in solidarity. They're in, the call is coming from in the room. And I think that has changed in the 20 years of reporting on the right that I've done.
Jeff,
this is a different moment.
Yeah. Jeff, we just have about a minute here before we're going to hit a hard break. You said that church was diverse. To what extent is this movement, this violent fascist movement, intertwined with white supremacy as opposed to just political philosophy?
Absolutely. It's 100%. I mean, the undertow of the book's title, you might even say it's the white supremacy that's drawing out. But I'm really impressed by a book called White Evangelical Racism by a scholar named Anthea Butler, and she speaks of the promise of whiteness. The American contribution to the new fascism is to weirdly make it diverse, to hold out to some people of color that you can join this white supremacist movement. And sadly, some do.
Kind of the Tim Scotts of the world, you mean?
The Tim Scotts, the Candace Owens, the huge number of Latinx voters for Trump. It's quite something, and I think it's saying that fascism has a gravitational pull right now that is just building momentum. Again, or the better metaphor is the undertow.
How do we break the fever here, Jeff, in 10 seconds or less?
Yeah, my 10-second plan. I'm afraid I don't have that answer. This is a book about mapping the menace, and someone else will have to chart the path through.
Yeah, I totally get it. Jeff Sharlet, his book is called The Undertow, Scenes from a Slow Civil War. It's a grim read. It's an extraordinary read. You got to get this book. Jeff, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking.